Stephanie Carvin is an associate professor of international relations at the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University with a focus on security and technology. She's also a former national security analyst with the Canadian government. Stephanie Carvin, thanks for your time tonight. First off, what's the government trying to address here? What's it trying to prevent with this new bill on cybersecurity?
So really there's two things. The first part of the bill basically changes parts of the Telecommunications Act and gives the government the ability to ban certain high-risk vendors from Canada's telecommunications systems. This has basically been something we've been waiting for since 2018, and it was announced a few weeks ago that the government had made a decision to ban Huawei and another company, ZTE, from Canada's telecommunications network. So this is the bill that, in effect, enables that, and also future technologies or companies, if they're so deemed to also be posing similar threats. The second part of the legislation is really focused on improving Canada's cybersecurity. It's not enough to simply ban companies because, there's been a lot of speculation that China is very good at, or can use companies like Huawei or ZTE to as a backdoor to get into our critical cyber systems. But, China is very good at hacking us right now. And not just China, but other countries as well, such as Russia. So this basically requires or sets standards in four federally regulated areas for them to actually meet those cyber standards in order to improve, hopefully, some of the cyber security out there.
Okay, how open, if I can put it that way, have Canadian companies been at reporting cyber attacks? We do hear about from time to time, and I think a lot of Canadians wonder how many we don't hear about.
Yeah, and that's another important part of this bill as well, right? It's to improve information sharing. That's something we often hear a lot of criticism about that, private sector companies don't have to report to the government if they are in fact hacked. And so the government doesn't actually have a good picture of what's happening out there. So this bill actually corrects that and puts in place measures for, compulsory reporting. Again, only in these four federally regulated sectors, but that's important going forward. The only time that private companies do usually have to report is that if the privacy of Canadians are breached in any kind of hack, right? They have to report that to the Privacy Commissioner, but this is going well beyond that.
The government is asking for the authority in this bill to obtain confidential information from private companies to decide what cybersecurity improvements they need to make, and they would prohibit those companies or anyone else from telling the public if the government identified weaknesses. Is there a transparency problem here? What should Canadians be allowed to know about what the Canadian government has ordered private companies to do to improve their cybersecurity?
The legislation as written does have some concerns from a transparency perspective. I think you spelled that out. There is a lot in this bill that allows the government to put out orders in secret, and that's not great from a transparency perspective. When speaking to high-level officials earlier today, they're quite adamant that these are extraordinary measures, and they would only use them in the case, for example, if there was a vulnerability that they didn't yet want to make public because other people could take advantage of the knowledge that there is a security flaw out there that could be, taken advantage of. So, in that sense, they would want to keep it secret. But I would hope that in the committee stage, that as this bill is being studied, that we can find ways to make it more transparent, some kind of reporting mechanism. I do note that in the the second part of the legislation about improving cybersecurity, that there is a reporting requirement to Parliament, but that's lacking in the first part of the bill, and I think it's something that's needed.
The bill doesn't actually, as I see it, identify the companies covered by the measures yet. That list is still being compiled. But what kinds of companies are we talking about?
Well, really, it could be any company. And, this has also been some concern. So, for example, we're obviously going to think of the large telecommunication companies like Bell, Rogers, TELUS. But, there's smaller companies out there as well. And, they may in good faith in the future install some technology into their systems and then be told, no, you have to take it out. And, oh, and by the way, the legislation stipulates that we don't have to give you any money for that. And these are two very different propositions for a company like, say, Rogers or Bell versus, say, a much smaller, internet provider, say, perhaps in a local or rural community. So I think this is something that may come up in the future, that, could be excessively punitive to smaller internet service providers, for example, and may in fact hinder competition if they're penalized in this way.
The bill would impose expensive penalties on individuals. I think it's $1 million and $15 million for others. Companies that don't do enough to protect themselves against cyber attacks. Do those penalties, I'm not sure how they compare to what other countries are doing, but do they go far enough? Do they send the right message?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, certainly my eyes kind of popped when I saw those numbers, and I believe it's on a daily basis in some cases. So, but that's up to the tribunal, to judges and things like this. If certain companies are not deemed to be in compliance, I would hope that before we actually got to that stage, that some kind of agreement could be put forward. But yeah, I mean, I think if a company was looking at having to face a $10 million fine because they weren't compliant, they would probably seek to find a way to be compliant, or at least find some kind of compromise with the government going forward. It's a large sum of money.
All right. Stephanie Carvin, good to get your perspective on this legislation introduced today. Appreciate your time tonight, and thanks for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.